currently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with the weekly edition of Global Alert News for July 23rd, 2016. The show is broadcast Saturday mornings, 6 to 7 a.m. on KQMS. And as another week unfolds, how many people are completely distracted from the wider horizon? Distraction is created intentionally by those who want to hide the severity of what's unfolding around all of us till the last possible moment. This Global Alert News Hour is nearly an hour of commercial-free news, not nearly enough time to cover even a fraction of what needs to be covered, but at least it's a start. No commercial interruptions in this program for that purpose. I want to start by reminding everybody, major upcoming event at the Cascade Theater in Reading on August 5th, 2016. This is a free public information event, extremely important event. And I want to ask, this event covers, by the way, the newly released vaccination dangers, climate engineering, another severe threat, also with a former CIA officer, what our government does to those who try to tell the truth. So again, I ask, what caring parent, what moral medical professional would not take the time to examine and investigate, in the case of the vaccinations, the recently available data from CDC, Centers for Disease Control, which has been disclosed by a top-level CDC scientist? How could any truly caring parent or medical professional turn away from such information? What citizen who claims to be patriotic would not want to hear what decorated CIA officer Kevin Shipp has to say about what our government, again, is doing to any that attempt to disclose truths that the government does not want told? A reminder, the Obama administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined. And this is just the state of our country. It doesn't matter what puppet they have in the presidential office. It doesn't matter. It's all heading the same direction. How can we look at our children in the eyes? How can we look ourselves in the mirror if we turn away from unpleasant but essential to face truths? Please attend the completely free August 5th event at the Cascade Theater. Pick up a flyer at Orchard Nutrition. Complete flyer, complete schedule. Free at Orchard. Tell others the truth has been hidden for far too long. A major dose of truth will be available at the August 5th event in Reading. We've been lied to on countless levels. We're living in a lie. Every day is a further deepening of that lie, and we are headed for the wall at full velocity on countless levels. It's time to wake up for all of us. On the Cascade event, a reminder to those listening who live in Reading, many might know this already, but there's no bank parking in the parking lot just north of the Cascade Theater. There's a major public parking lot just north of the Cascade, north of Placer. Should be plenty of room there for free parking. For those from out of town, you can find this parking lot just north of the Cascade Theater. Lots of room. I want to continue now. The vast majority of our media is still completely betraying the population. Consider this. Of all the stories I'll cover in this program today, how many of them have North State citizens heard from our local corporate franchise propaganda sources of media? How many dire and essential stories have we heard from the Record Searchlight or KRCR? To put both these primary Northern California stations on notice, are either of them going to objectively cover the upcoming extremely important public awareness event at the Cascade Theater? It's a question. Are they going to cover it objectively? I think it's a safe bet we can say no. Whatever coverage either of these corporate media tentacles may give to this event, it will be the usual official narrative of personal attacks on the doctors or others who are speaking at the event, who've had the courage to try and disclose the extremely damning data about vaccinations that came right from a governmental agency, by the way, again, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, right from a top CDC scientist that has stated on the record the CDC has systematically hidden information for decades, proving vaccinations are doing harm to our children. But in the end, it's all about money, isn't it? It's all about money for so many who work for these media companies. They don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, and they all know where the money's coming from in the end. As I've said before, our children's health, our own health, is sold to the highest bidder, and that, of course, is the medical, industrial, pharmaceutical industry. Mainstream medical procedures have their place. I don't deny that. But when there's major and even primary aspects of mainstream medicine that are completely controlled by those who profit off the damage being inflicted to the population by those procedures, how can that be overlooked in the medical field? Those who take an oath to, quote, do no harm. And yes, that is their oath. And knowing that, consider how completely resistant the vast majority of the medical community is to even looking at information that could negatively impact their bottom line. Even inarguably valid information that came straight from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. The genius of our power structure controlled corporate media propaganda machine is that the majority of the people have no clue that they're being fed lies or stories that don't matter, while extremely dire issues are completely omitted or completely spun into a pack of lies. If you want to get a taste of how the corporate media machine works, go online and view the documentary film Outfoxed. Outfoxed, Outfoxed. It's online, full-length version. This documentary covers Fox News, which we've all been told countless times by Fox News is, quote, fair and balanced, which couldn't be further from the truth. Watch this documentary and see if it doesn't shatter your delusion. And this fact, by the way, applies to all other corporate media flavors of propaganda, because that's what they are, different flavors of propaganda to appeal to different segments of society so that each segment thinks it has the truth, it's being told the truth, it knows where to find the truth in their own particular flavor of media propaganda. It's all lies. CNN, MSNBC, and also included, as I've stated many times in the past, those that think they're getting the full truth from the far left progressive media like Amy Goodman and the largest quote, progressive news program on the world, Democracy Now!, think again. As I've stated before, Amy Goodman receives funding from the corporate Ford Foundation and is told not to touch the most critical issues of all, like what happened on 9/11, like climate engineering, like the CDC whistleblower truth about vaccination dangers. Other sources of so-called progressive news, like Common Dreams, for example, are no different. Try to post some verifiable facts about climate engineering, the weather warfare assault, or 9/11. Try to post something like that on a site like Common Dreams, who claims to be telling us the truth, like Democracy Now! Claims to be telling us the truth, and see how long your comments last. They'll be immediately deleted because these people know how long their leash is. And the mainstream corporate media, they simply exist to perpetuate the official propaganda of the power structure, period. And amazingly, there's many that have convinced themselves, I'll get to headlines in a moment, but there's many that have convinced themselves that if something bad was really happening, they'd hear about it from, for example, the Drudge Report or Glenn Beck. And again, this couldn't be further from the truth, couldn't be further from reality. Are Drudge and Beck covering the truth about 9/11? Are Drudge and Beck covering the toxic climate engineering, which is decimating the planet and our health? Are they covering the extremely damaging vaccinations? No, of course not. Drudge and Beck are just part of the grand illusion, like Democracy Now!, like Common Dreams, and like all the other mainstream media sources. And in fact, recently, while viewing another Beck program, and I try to suffer through all available sources of media so that I can better understand what they're feeding the population. But while suffering through a Beck program, there was such a massively long chain of commercials on Beck's show that I actually forgot what channel I was on. Beck is nothing more than an ideological mass marketing tool that resembles the fraudulent TV evangelists. That's what he's like. And how can people not see through him? And all the rest that I just named. It's not about this side or that side. They're all just different sides to the same coin. The election theater of mass distraction will now be played for the next 4 months while the biosphere and many countries around the globe continue to descend into total collapse. That's the reality. It's time to wake up to that reality while there's anything left to salvage. And the population, at least the majority of it, has long since been lulled into counterfeit virtual world where they don't know and don't want to know what's going on in the real world or with the environment on which they and their children depend for their lives and every breath they take. Much more environmental implosion news coming in the headlines. Bear with me. A final bit to this rant here, but our society is filled with the ranks of order followers, order takers that are just doing their jobs with no thought whatsoever to the moral implications for the damage being done to the greater good. In fact, here's an example of just such an individual who's employed at our own local Reading office of the California EPA. I've been to this office in the past to leave credible data about the heavy metal contamination in our precipitation, our rain, that's proven from dozens of rain tests, precipitation tests, done at our local state-certified lab. And if these metals are in our rain, by the way, they're in our breathable air column. Thus, we inhale them with every breath we take. And these metals match exactly the primary elements named in climate engineering patents, starting with aluminum and barium. So when offered this data, people at the Cal EPA office here in Reading, they don't want to look at this, let alone discuss it in any legitimate fashion. And who's one such order follower at our local EPA office? I'll name him by name, George Day, who on my most recent visit to Cal EPA about a week ago made it clear to me, again, that he was not the least bit interested to look at any of the information about this contamination. Not at all interested. But perhaps George Day and the Cal EPA office will be a bit more interested when their office gets notice of a coming legal action, which is in the process of moving forward now. What will it take for legal action to be successful? The public must wake up, look at the facts. The public and the population must help hold the order followers legally and morally accountable. The public must play a part in this battle for the greater good, or it has no chance of success. And that public is you, me, and everyone else listening to this. Everyone we know, our families, everyone must play a part if we're to change the direction of the Titanic on which we're all currently passengers. What about the ongoing crimes of the power structure? How many people know that the U.S. has consistently refused to be a part of the ICC, the International Criminal Court? This is business as usual from the bottom to the top, from the local EPA office with the technician there who knows exactly where his paycheck and pension is coming from and is not about to risk it, regardless of the cataclysms that he's turning a blind eye to, all the way to the top, all the way to the U.S. government that refuses to be a part of the International Criminal Court. Because how many crimes have we committed here? How many countries have we illegally invaded? How about the non-existent Saddam Hussein weapons of mass destruction? And the weapons of mass destruction that Hussein did have, by the way, and he did. And he did kill innocent people with those weapons. Absolutely. Guess where they came from? How many have seen the photograph of Hussein shaking hands with Donald Rumsfeld, one of the primary criminals involved with U.S. military aggression around the globe? How many have seen that photograph? You can search it online. We gave Saddam Hussein some of the gases he used to gas the Kurds. This is business as usual. And the U.S., because of actions like this, and the list is too endless to even begin to go into, they don't want to be a part of the ICC. And yet, this is what everyone's protecting? Is this the America that Donald Trump wants to protect and make great again? That term is used so lightly. And people who have no clue what's going on in the real world because they don't want to know, they just want to wave flags and ignore what's going on. instead of trying to truly make their country great, to make their country a law-abiding global citizen that doesn't behave in this way, and I'm not saying other countries are, I'm not saying that. Too many people think dichotomously, that if you criticize your own country, you must love every other country. Not true. It's not the case. Dichotomous black and white thinking is part of the problem. It's not a this or that equation. It's very complex. But the fact of the matter is our country is absolutely ignoring international law on countless fronts. In fact, how many people know which countries refuse to sign the global ban on landmines? Guess who? The United States and North Korea. 2 countries. I believe there might be one more, but there's only 2 or 3 countries, and the U.S. is one of them. How many people know that? How many people want to know that? A quick note on Turkey, the U.S. NATO ally. It's interesting, is it interesting, I should say, to anyone, that as soon as the coup occurred, there seemed to already be a government-held list of all those that were to be rounded up. Is that alarming to anybody? Here's a few headlines on that issue. That should alarm people greatly. That there seems to be much more to what has just happened there, and the people that were rounded up were already on a list. Headline, Turkey coup update, 50,000 people suspended, detained in Erdogan's purge. How about that? 50,000. How could they compile such a list so quickly? Second headline, Erdogan declares emergency in which he can rule by decree. This model's not hard to follow. Another headline pertaining to this, White House won't criticize Turkey for crackdown. Does this all fit together? Will some similar tactic soon be implemented in the U.S. as the crimes of the power structure become impossible to hide and the population begins to wake up? On that note, here's a few more headlines. The world is taking its revenge against the elites. When will America wake up? When? When will Americans wake up? The last potential counterbalancing force on the planet. But Americans have to wake from their virtual world and face the real world. About other headlines, there's far too many to cover, but I'll get to some of the most important ones in a moment. On a general note about the economy, which again must implode along with the environment. How about this headline? Bank earnings, Wall Street is running out of jobs to cut. Bank earnings falling, Wall Street is running out of jobs to cut. Now, how is it that the U.S. market has just hit new highs? Because the entire economy is and has been a facade. A printed money card house that's now consuming itself as the environment and the climate system implodes. The environment that has been ruthlessly raped, pillaged, plundered to keep the facade of our perpetual growth going on a finite planet with finite resources. What a total delusion that Americans live with. They've seen too many futuristic movies in which technology always fixes everything. And I challenge everyone to consider, how much has technology done for us so far? We are free-falling at unprecedented speed into the 6th great mass extinction on our planet. Mathematically speaking, we are faced with global extinction in the blink of an eye. If we stay on this course, that's a mathematical fact. Is technology helping us? I'm not saying that technology doesn't have a place, but how much of it is used properly and truly for the common good, and how much reality are Americans willing to face when they convince themselves that somehow everything will always magically work out and we can just keep consuming forever, we can keep building McMansions forever, we can keep stripping hillsides, pumping toxic waste everywhere into the environment, and magically live happily ever after. That's a delusion. That's a delusion. To back up the severity of what we face, here's some hard headlines. Quote, this is from Energy News. Hundreds of offshore fracking wells dump billions of gallons of oil waste into the Gulf. Now, this is on top of the BP spill that did unimaginable damage and all the other spills that have been going on forever that Americans don't want to know about because that might make them feel some sense of responsibility. And I hope that sense of responsibility comes soon, because we're not going to have anything left to save or salvage if it doesn't. From this headline about the billions of gallons of oil waste being dumped into the Gulf, As the U.S. shale industry comes under increasing scrutiny for its environmental and health impact, it has emerged that the U.S. has approved fracking offshore, leading to billions of gallons of wastewater being dumped at sea. Let's just use the ocean for a giant toxic waste toilet. That's exactly what we do. And it's not just the fracking. It's cruise ships, military ships, you name it. I mean, where would we start this list? The ocean is used for a giant toilet, toxic waste toilet. Continuing from this report, the Center for Biological Diversity has released federal documents that reveal that the officials approved more than 1,200 offshore fracks in 630 different wells in the 4 years from 2010 to 2014. I covered this story somewhat before, but this is another new headline with a much higher number of known toxic waste being dumped into the Gulf. Continuing from this report, the Gulf of Mexico has already been suffering from decades of conventional oil and gas drilling, as well as the aftermath of the devastating Deepwater Horizon blowout in 2010, when millions of gallons of oil were spilt. Now, remember the BP spill, when we saw the wellhead gushing into the ocean, and we were told that it was an amount of oil that was actually about 1/20th of what was actually coming out of that head? Back to vaccinations, back to the EPA office I mentioned in Reading, the whole system across the board is designed to downplay and hide the severity of threats faced to the environment and the population by corporate entities, those who hold power, governments. The population is pacified by this massive system of deception. This scenario must change immediately, or we will have nothing left of our planet's life support systems to salvage. Continuing from this report, the newly released documents reveal that fracking occurred off the coast of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama with no public involvement and no site-specific tests undertaken beforehand. Business as usual. Just cover it up. Don't look under any rock that you don't want to find something under. So just don't look under the rock at all. Don't do the tests at all. This is how our system is designed. Continuing from this report, in so doing, the industry was also allowed to dump a staggering 76 billion gallons of waste fluid into the sea in 2014 alone. 76 billion gallons. And that's what we know about. If you think the actual number is anywhere near 76 billion, guess again. It's probably 3, 4, 5 times that much, because that's how the system works. The report continues. There's a real reason to be worried by this dumping. Over the last 18 months, there's been growing concern about fracking chemicals contained within fracking wastewater. Of course they're there. Why wouldn't those chemicals be there? The report continues. Just over a year ago, the UK-based Kim Trust issued a report and briefing paper on how toxic chemicals from fracking could affect wildlife and people. Now, what a ridiculous statement that is. And we see this all the time, this downplaying of obviously dire information. But are we to think that the toxic fracking chemicals could affect wildlife and could affect people? What a ridiculous statement. It's like saying if you leap in front of a semi moving 70 miles an hour, you could get hurt. What a ridiculous statement. And we need scientists to tell us that this could harm wildlife and people, and then the population convinces itself that if it was really bad, they would make a stronger statement. We need to alter our society's philosophy from making it a priority to hide from the truth to making it a priority to face the truth. Continuing from the report identified specific examples of hazardous materials used in fracking, including chemicals associated with leukemia in humans and toxic to sperm production in males. Continuing on the report, the Trust warned it is particularly concerned about the use of hormone-disrupting chemicals, commonly known as endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs. Last October, new research found that the fracking chemicals are linked with decreased sperm count in adulthood. Finally, in April, and not to mention a host of other diseases. Okay, they're focusing on one thing here, but not focusing on the whole bigger picture. Finally, in April this year, a new scientific study found high levels of 16 endocrine disruptors in samples taken near a fracking site. Why is this a surprise? And they tell us that this toxic brew of 500 plus fracking chemicals, that's how many are used, which don't have to be disclosed, by the way, thanks to Darth Cheney. and that certainly should be his name. How can this be? How can you have any laws, environmental laws in the country, when they don't even have to disclose what they're pumping into the oceans, what they're pumping into our well waters, because they're disposing fracking fluid in wells? Is also, how insane is this equation? Continuing with the final paragraphs. And now it seems fracking wastewater has been dumped at sea without anyone's knowledge or oversight. Fracking has largely been in a shroud of secrecy, again, thanks to Darth Cheney. The oceans director at the Center for Biological Diversity said, quote, "It's a dangerous activity that has no place in our oceans or in the Gulf of Mexico." Has no place, period. On land either. This is an insane practice. Final paragraphs. According to the Director of Biological Diversity and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, quote, this is a statement from them, "We didn't really know what chemicals, and still don't know what chemicals, are being discharged into the Gulf of Mexico." What kind of a statement is that? From those that are paid to know. And this is the world we live in. Final paragraph. The Obama administration is essentially letting oil companies frack at will in the Gulf ecosystem and dump billions of gallons of oil waste into coastal waters. Every offshore frack increases the risk to wildlife and coastal communities. Yet, federal officials have been just rubber stamping this toxic practice in the Gulf of Mexico for years. This is exactly what's going on. It's a systemic problem from bottom to top. Going right back here to our local community of Redding in Northern California, where I know for a fact that such contamination is being hidden by our own environmental wastewater quality, because I've been in a meeting with some of these local officials, shown the test to my face. This is going back 6 years, and they have never disclosed those tests. And I am prepared to testify in a court of law. Absolutely prepared. And if our attorneys and our attorney team call me to do so, I will do so, and I'll name the names of the people at that meeting. This is our lives, our children's lives, their health we're talking about here. When we have agencies from the bottom to the top hiding contamination, we have such blatant, egregious assaults on the environment like I just named. Any who ignore this, any who claim that the human race is not harming the environment, you're living in a delusion, willful delusion. So what's it doing to the environment? And this is, again, astoundingly, at this late date, when we have so much frontline data, we don't need to listen to a particular source. We just simply need to open our eyes. Look at film footage of frontline data, what's happening around the globe, to understand, to some degree, the damage that's been done to our planet. And you can't, I want to put in the most simple terms, for those who still, at this late date, are trying to convince themselves that the human race couldn't possibly have harmed the climate. How can you come to such a conclusion? Do you think, for those who are convincing themselves of this, do you think that a forest is going to keep an area cooler than a black pavement parking lot? Which would be cooler in the middle of the heat of the day? Which would it be? Do you think that putting 100 million tons of CO2 in the atmosphere a day is not going to have an effect? Do you think that that just floats out into space somewhere? And I don't like Al Gore either. Carbon credits is a sham. I say this over and over because people don't hear it. They don't hear it. All they hear is, well, you think the planet's warming, so you must love Al Gore, so you must be one of them. It's that kind of dichotomous thinking that the power structure loves. They love that because it causes a society not to be able to get an accurate compass heading and to unite in a common cause for the greater good, to expose those in power for what they are, for the tyrants, criminal tyrants that they are. So back to the climate and how hot it is. If you think that human activity has not affected the climate, you're not looking at reality. And with climate engineering, the so-called cure that I mentioned that has every scientific panel in the world is discussing, every government around the globe, that John Brennan, CIA director, just outlined as being something they might have to do, as if they're not doing it already. That is the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. But all of these things are factors, all of them. It's not just a this or that. So with all these factors going on, we have decimated the planet's energy balance, decimated it. The equilibrium is gone, and now we are free falling into uncharted territory. And that is a very inhospitable planet. It's happening exponentially fast. So the more the planet tries to respond to the damage already done by human activity, and the more the climate engineers disrupt that attempt to respond by the planet and doing even more damage in the process, the faster we fall into the abyss of a planet that will not support life. It's that simple. And all the other factors, all the other causes people are working on right now, if they're not focusing on these priority causes, it's a moot point. And getting back to climate engineering and the air we breathe and the tests that our local EPA officers ignore, and again, if the rain is laden with these toxic heavy metals, that means it's in the air column, that means it's in every breath we take, and if we're breathing in these metals known to cause neurological damage, like Alzheimer's, like autism, and this is in addition to the vaccinations, which are adding to the problem, but if we know that every breath we take is laden with these metals and it's affecting our ability to think, what could be a greater priority? If it's toxifying the environment, shredding the ozone layer, disrupting our hydrological cycle, pushing the planet further into superheating, what could be more important than dealing with that? A simple question. So when we have statistics like 1 million children in our country now, 1 million with autism, we have 5 million citizens with Alzheimer's and dementia, 5 million. Neurological diseases off the scale. 1 in 3 seniors now dies with Alzheimer's or dementia. Are we to believe that's normal because we have commercials now that make it seem normal? That everybody's got asthma, COPD, allergies, and or Alzheimer's? We see Alzheimer's commercials now as if that's normal. It's time to wake up. It's time to wake up. And in regard to the planet's ability to support life, how much damage has actually been done? Let's look at some ocean temperatures and what's happening around the globe. I want to piece this puzzle together. Here's a headline. Record hot Atlantic basin to fuel 2016 hurricanes. But there's a question mark in that headline. There's a question mark. Let me finish with this report. Last week, Gulf of Mexico sea surface temperatures off Tampa Bay were outrageously hot. On July 10th, the ocean temperatures measured 93 degrees. By the 11th, the temperatures had warmed still more, and by the 12th, ocean surface temperatures had hit a sweltering 95 degrees. This is bathwater. Is it any wonder everything's dying in the ocean, in addition to the toxic fracking fluid, in addition to the shredded ozone layer, which rains down immensely powerful UV, which kills plankton, which drops the bottom out of the food chain? It's closing in from every direction. So we have 95-degree ocean temperatures. Now, let's connect another dot. Here's a headline from USA Today. U.S. experiencing record hurricane drought. How come with these massively warm oceans, massively warm temperatures, and record hurricanes all over the globe, why isn't it happening here? Because the U.S. military is directing hurricane suppression programs that are making sure there's no major U.S. landfall. In the case of the Gulf of Mexico, which is also at record high temperatures, how much oil would that stir up? How much fracking fluid would that stir up from the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico if there was a major hurricane? While they're still spraying Corexit, the highly toxic chemical banned throughout the globe, still being used likely on the Macondo BP wellhead to make sure that oil doesn't hit the surface. This is business as usual to cover everything up as long as possible. This is the mentality we're dealing with. These people are not sane. And I hear this over and over again, the famous, why would they do this to themselves? They wouldn't do this to themselves. They being the central bankers, ultimately, those who print the money, those who run the militaries, those who run the countries. How many things are they doing to themselves? Not just completely toxifying our oceans with fracking fluid, Corexit, and spilled oil, but also radiation. I'll get to that in a moment. And they're building 60 more nuclear plants right now. We'll have the Fukushima nuclear volcano, which I'll update on in a moment. So we have, in spite of record warm oceans, in spite of a record warm world, in spite of record hurricanes all over the globe, the U.S. has not had a major hurricane impact for over 11 years. 11 years. After the record-shattering impacts in 04, 05, 05, 06, nothing since. Nothing. No major impact. Nothing in the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing ever spins there. And we can see them knocking these convection centers down on radar. And we have patents for this, by the way. We have patented hurricane suppression materials. Why would we think this isn't going on? Time to wake up. Another headline. The World Meteorological Association states 2016 on track to be the hottest year on record. From that report, average temperatures in the first 6 months of 2016 were 1.3 C above baseline. NASA fears over climate change impacts continue to mount. Now, 1.3 C, that's about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. But, as I've stated many times, everywhere we check official high temperature readings, we see an under-reporting of those temperatures. A radical under-reporting. We often see 3, 4, 5 degree under-reporting of those temperatures. What's that mean? It means that we are already likely past 3.5 degrees C of temperature rise. The human race has not existed on the planet over that 3.5 degrees C baseline. We're in uncharted territory. That doesn't mean that everything, as I've stated before, doesn't just die overnight, but it's damn sure dying. From species extinction rate that's now pushing 300 a day. 300 species of plant and animal and insect a day are going extinct. That's how quickly our planet is dying. Another headline. We're on course for the hottest year on record, UN's World Meteorological Organization has confirming the first headline I just read. From that report, data from the U.S. National Oceanic Administration and NASA published this week confirmed June was the 14th month in a row to break temperature records. Consecutively, one after another, breaking the previous all-time monthly high temperature records for any month. Another month, this is from the report, I'm quoting, another month, another record, and another. Decades-long trends of climate change are reaching new climaxes. Now, as the planet heats up radically, and by the way, the heating is so immense, we've just passed the 9th consecutive 12-month period in a row of record high 12-month periods, 9 in a row. Now, as that happens, bodies of water around the world are succumbing to excessive heat, excessive UV radiation, and excessive contamination, as I mentioned earlier. Here's a headline. A smelly, guacamole-thick muck is terrorizing Utah water, killing animals and poisoning hundreds of humans. Have we seen this headline in our local media about not just this body of water, but how many around the globe are becoming toxic pools of dead life? From this report, what looked like a local problem in Florida now smells more like a nationwide emergency. The report continues. There are 20 reported cases of animals exposed to the toxins, as well as some 100 dead ducks found in one of the more than half dozen canals that connect to the Jordan River. This is from Utah, the Utah Lake. Roughly 330 people in Utah were reported poisoned after exposure to the water. A toxic bacterium similar to that causing a state of emergency in Florida is now terrorizing Utah, with hundreds already reported to be poisoned by contaminated water. Now, we know we were issued a health warning for Lake Shasta by local authorities. Why weren't we told sooner? When we've tried to deliver rain tests for toxic materials that, by the way, kill beneficial aquatic life and help to have these other life forms then proliferate, why has it taken so long for any acknowledgement of this? Until they can't hide it. Until they can't. In fact, one of the lab tests that we delivered to our local supervisors, which are our local air quality people and our local Shasta County Environmental Health, were from tributaries feeding into Lake Shasta. One of those tests contained staggeringly high levels of aluminum. In fact, every single test has very high levels of aluminum, but some of the tributaries, the amount of metals were unimaginably high after precipitation events, which again were exactly where the tests that I was shown by Reading Environmental Waste were after precipitation events when we know it's in the rain. If it's in the rain, how could it not be in the tributaries? So now we have beneficial soil microbes being killed off, beneficial aquatic microbes being killed off. We have a loss of balance in the ecosystem. We have massively high UV radiation, which is helping to warm the water. We have extreme temperatures. And we have now ecosystems that are dying. They're in collapse, period. Another headline. In Florida, another headline of algae bloom and mass die-off. From that report, thousands of dead fish wash up along the beach of Okaloosa Island, Florida. A smelly, again, the same term used in the Utah Lake, guacamole-thick muck is fouling a stretch of beaches promoted as Florida's, quote, treasure coast. Florida Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency last Thursday as blooms of toxic algae plagues beaches along the state's Atlantic coast. However, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission are not blaming algae blooms for the death of thousands of fish which have washed up. What are they blaming? It's, again, these agencies are trained to pacify the public or to not know what's going on. They always claim they don't know what's going on. I went over the ocean temperatures in Florida earlier. Unimaginably warm temperatures. The energy balance has been lost on our planet for all the reasons I already went over. Countless forms of human activity. Climate engineering being at the top of the list, but by no means the only source. The human race has been unimaginably poor stewards of our planet. Another headline, follow-up headline, on the Great Barrier Reef. It's even worse than we thought. Here's the headline. Sections of Great Barrier Reef suffering from, quote, complete ecosystem collapse. From this report, complete ecosystem collapse is being seen on many parts of the Great Barrier Reef as fish numbers tumble and surviving corals continue to bleach into winter, according to scientists returning from the worst hit areas. Another headline, countless coral reefs are dying around the world. From that report, El Nino is over, but the global coral bleaching event just won't end. Quote, another headline, global heat spurs bleaching, mass coral mortality. From that report, all this newly added surface heat represents a big step into much warmer conditions for the global climate. What this means is that even the coolest months now will probably approximate the warmest months during the big super El Nino of 98. In other words, what's, quote, cool now was extreme warmth only a few years ago, because now that's the new norm. From this report continuing, such a large temperature increase in so short a period means that the world has likely hit a number of tipping points for geophysical and ecological harm. One of the most visible of these tipping points involves the ongoing ecological crisis, the coral bleaching events. Final paragraph from this report. Perhaps the most vivid and heart-wrenching example of what is a very wide-ranging coral mortality situation is, again, the bleaching damage to Australia's Great Barrier Reef. This important statement in this second report on this. And a terrible blow to one of the world's most stunning natural wonders. The Great Barrier Reef's corals have, in many locations, already been completely killed off. An event that some scientists say may lead to a 100% mortality of the reef's corals. Think about that. Where are those headlines in our local media? Where are they? And if you think that that doesn't affect you living here in America, you're dead wrong. The kelp forests here are also disintegrating and dying off. That's an even bigger ecosystem. Not just here, but from here to New Zealand to everywhere else. The ocean is dying by the day. What else is that heat doing? Here's a headline from Greenland. Greenland lost over 1 trillion tons of ice from January 1st, 2011 to December 31st, 2014. Now, the oceans are rising rapidly. Those in power, especially on the very susceptible U.S. East Coast, are making sure that hurricanes don't make that problem even more visible. And the Gulf of Mexico, for reasons I already stated, hiding that problem as well. So when they're doing this, is that a good thing? Because some people would stand back and say that's a good thing. They're keeping hurricanes from damaging the coast. When the planet is trying to cool itself, when the planet is trying to blend the oceans to mix them so that they don't become stratified and lifeless and oxygenless, this is part of the planet's life support systems. If you suppress that, you're doing immense harm to the planet. You're altering the entire life support process of the planet. It's utter folly, complete insanity to intervene on that scale when the planet is trying desperately to compensate for the damage done, and it can't. It can't. Because those in power are so determined to have complete control over everything, including the climate, they are willing to suppress Earth's life support systems. And because people living along those coastlines perhaps don't want to know any of this. Because even if the planet has to die for their beach house to have a little extra protection, for some people that's okay. But is it okay? Can we look our children in the face and say, well, we're sorry the planet's dead, but at least we protected our beach house until the last possible moment? At least we kept the party going until the last possible moment? Is that really what we want to tell our children? Let's take an even bigger example of what's not being told to us. This is an update. Fukushima Daiichi decommissioning takes a horrible turn. Now, is the Searchlight and KRC are telling us this? And will they cover the incredibly close to home vaccination issue as our children are forced to be vaccinated before they go to school this year? Will our local media cover that? Because they're sure not covering the story I'm about to read to you right now. NHK reports that the decommissioning authority in charge of dealing, that's a news source by the way, of dealing with the aftermath of the Fukushima disaster is now considering a sarcophagus to entomb the failed reactors rather than attempting to remove the melted fuel debris and buildings. The authority told NHK that they would still consider the two fuel removal techniques, but they are adding the sarcophagus to the options list. Now, they don't have any idea what they're doing here, by the way. For those that think the power structure knows exactly what they're doing and they have it all mapped out and they're all following their agenda, we're talking about men, not gods, very fallible, blind, psychotic men and women that lust for power so much they don't care about the consequences. That's what we're talking about. So, again, what we see in Fukushima is the same kind of completely chaotic and unimaginably lethal fiasco going on that we see happening all over the globe. Continuing from the report, they did not elaborate about why it is now being officially added to the considered options for the plant, meaning the sarcophagus. The report continues. The idea of leaving the plant as is and creating a sarcophagus around the three melted down reactors is extremely problematic. The groundwater issue is just one problem that would be a permanent problem. Even the ice wall, if it eventually works, and for those that don't know what that is, they are trying to induce a chemical ice wall in the ground to freeze a barrier in place to try to contain this massive toxic radioactive runoff. How insane is that? Continuing from the report, erosion and groundwater flows would create a permanent problem for the ocean and the region around the plant. This would also, and the rest of the world, by the way, this would also leave the fuel and crumbled buildings in place. Building failures, radioactive dust, and fuel debris would still be in place. This would need to be managed not just due to aging, but to further natural disasters, such as typhoons and tsunamis. Current problems include fuel fragments that have been found in Unit 1's basement water. These have been a concern as groundwater flows through the basement, and that is improperly managed. More of these fuel fragments could leave the basement into the groundwater. At Chernobyl, continuing from this report, at Chernobyl, the new cover building there is expected to be needed for 100 years, while they attempt to eventually deal with the damaged building. When and how that happens is still vague, and decades later. Final statement from this report. TEPCO and the related groups tasked with dealing with the disaster at the plant site have been rather reserved, engaging the press in recent months. An admission that the company had purposely covered up the reactor meltdowns for months was told to NHK, with a document on the issue showing up on the nuclear plant website weeks later. This new admission that the sarcophagus is being considered was again told to NHK without any public announcement on the NDF website or TEPCO's. This all raises concerns that new information has been discovered or confirmed recently that shows problems at the plant that the decommissioning authority cannot overcome. Yes, the walls are closing in from countless directions for all of us. They're absolutely closing in. Now, this cover-up at Fukushima, when they knew they had full reactor meltdowns, when that disaster initially occurred, how many people know that? How many people right now in our country think Fukushima is all taken care of? How many people in our country are still trying to convince themselves that nuclear energy is somehow clean, green energy? It's an example of the fracking, of the deep-sea drilling, and of countless other practices by the human race that are leading us all to certain near-term extinction, period. And the closest we get to home with that is what's being injected into our children's veins. All of this is part of the same cancer. It's all part of the same cancer. This is why this event in Reading is so important, because you can speak to the physicians involved in the front line of trying to disclose data that shows the mentality of those behind the curtain. The military-industrial complex, the medical-pharmaceutical industrial complex, that is absolutely not in existence for the greater good. They're in existence for their own purposes, period. If you think they care about your health, if you think those in the pharmaceutical industry that are hiding these vaccination dangers care about your health, you're mistaken. And I hope you have the courage to look at the facts. If you think that those in power would not do things to themselves like climate engineering, you're sadly mistaken. This is business as usual. They don't care about the consequences of their actions. And this is from psychoanalysis, by the way. I challenge anyone to investigate anything I've said here and what I'm about to say. A common trait in psychopathic individuals is a quote. I've repeated this many times, but it's so important to understand. A near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. We are not dealing with sanity. And if you're a member of the population that simply wants to keep pretending none of this is real, to keep pretending that those in power are somehow looking after you, if you want to keep behaving with the symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome, the protection, the defense of those who are actually oppressing you, if you want to keep playing that part, what future will your children have? What future will you have? The walls are closing in around us from every side. The human race must focus on preserving its own ability to survive on this planet, or we're not going to be around much longer. That's a mathematical fact. Now, what does one do when facing such immense challenges? What does one do? And here's a quote from 2,000 years ago that applies today. Something to consider from Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. And this same wisdom can be found in all the great traditions. If you look, it's there. But you have to get past the dogma and look at the value that's contained in so many places if we would simply search for it. From 2,000 years ago, Marcus Aurelius, quote, "Does what's happened keep you from acting with justice, generosity, self-control, sanity, prudence, honesty, humility, straightforwardness, and all other qualities that allow a person's nature to fulfill itself? So remember this principle. When something threatens to cause you pain, the thing itself was no misfortune to you at all. To endure it and to prevail is for the greater fortune." From Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. That's a book I've had in my possession since I was 14 years old, and I don't focus on any particular source of wisdom, but how does one argue with philosophies like this? That whatever happens to us, it's our responsibility to rise to the occasion, not to turn away, not to ram our head in the sand. And if we can rise to the occasion and we can prevail against unimaginable challenges, how much growth will that cause in us? Why are we here? If not to rise to the challenge and do everything in our power to protect our children's future. There is great solace in making the internal decision to face the truth, to face all challenges head on, not halfway, not half-heartedly, but with total conviction. Find out what you've not been told. Investigate. Make your voice heard in the battle for the greater good. Remember what Scott Peck, world-renowned psychoanalyst, said. Something to consider and always to remember. The hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire. Something that we should all consider deeply. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio. Make your voice heard for the greater good. Thank you.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.